Oh, this is an interesting episode of the Speed Secrets podcast. I'm talking with Randy Beikmann about the ideal cornering line from a physics perspective. But, of course, we'll also relate it to the reality of being behind the wheel. Shh. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another show, and on the show today is Randy Beikmann. And Randy and I first met a few years back when I was coaching at Grattan Raceway in Michigan with the Rally Sport region of the PCA, and really cool event. So, hey, welcome to the show, Randy.
Hi, Russ. Good to be here.
I just first that the events that the Rally Sport region PCA does at Grattan, those are just great events, and I've been to I think 4 or 5 of them. Great people, great event, great that it's sort of the perfect time of the year. It's just always, it seems like it's always nice weather. So great event. You've been a member of that club for a long time, or?
Yeah, for about 5 years, and I actually feel really privileged to be in it because that's just where I ended up when I joined PCA, and they have quite, the high performance driver education program, and Groton is kind of the big event of the year. Instead of having a big, Christmas dinner and stuff like that, which they do, they really make that, their big, big dinner and big party kind of thing. And it's nice to see that at a track event.
Yeah, I feel like I have some very, very close friends that I've developed over the years going to that event. So, great barbecue and everything. It's just it's a fun, really cool event. So,
definitely.
Hey, in December, you wrote a couple of articles for Speed Secrets Weekly, and I have to say, I mean, I filled up they filled up my inbox with real positive, interesting emails from, I think I probably got more comments on your 2 articles than just about any other in the 5+ years of doing Speed Secrets Weekly. So hugely popular. And what I love about those articles is they got readers thinking. And that's kind of the whole idea of this, is to get drivers thinking. So hugely popular. So thanks for doing that. Interesting stuff.
You bet. I had a good time, delving through it.
If you're listening to this podcast and you haven't read those articles, basically, Randy, you did some, I guess, modeling of the line through theoretical corners, and then obviously thinking about it in terms of, well, if you put them together, it's gonna result in faster lap times. Maybe that's a simplified. I guess, how would you describe the articles and the little project you've been working on?
I'd say that's a fair assessment. What I've been doing is through reading high performance driving books like yours. I've changed my attitude, I guess, and my assumptions about how to drive fast on the track. And I had done some calculations before on the classic racing line, and when you find out that really isn't the fastest way by carrying a constant radius all the way through, then it's like, okay, being an engineer, I want to know how much and how it makes that difference. So I've looked at some papers. There's a fair amount of work being done on this, not only for high performance driving, but there's a crossover into autonomous vehicles as far as controlling them. It's been interesting to see what other people are doing. And what I like to do is to take things that are fairly arcane, if you read these papers, very mathematical, and it takes a lot to dig into them, and then pull back and see, well, how can I think about this in simpler terms, something that I could actually envision on the track and do some simple modeling of my own. And that's what I've done here. And I think it's one of those things where, I know that there are better and faster ways than what I've come up with so far, but I feel like it's one of those, the 80-20 rule. When you get 80% of the way there with 20% of the effort. And then as you go further and further, you get closer to the optimal solution, but it's diminishing returns.
And talk to us about your engineering background. Like, I met you, we were at the track, you're driving on the track. So my first thought is, Randy, you're a driver, but you've got an engineering background, which I think is, it's the relationship between the two, the driver and the engineer. Can you talk about your engineering background and why you think the way you do?
Sure. Well, I've always been, a dyed-in-the-wool gearhead, and from an early age, back when I grew up in Kansas, and drove a '69 Cougar and different various attitudes on gravel roads and things like that. So I learned a lot about vehicle handling that way. Which actually helped me fly airplanes, because airplanes drift around, also. And so then I went to Michigan, University of Michigan eventually, after I went to Kansas State, and I took vehicle dynamics and internal combustion engines and automotive engineering courses there. And, that's what I was going to do. I was going to go in vehicle dynamics. And then I ended up in noise and vibration at GM. That was in '83. So I was doing that for 34 years. And now I've retired, and now I'm playing with this, I took a 1/3 of a century break from it. And now I'm doing it again for kind of a hobby. So, but I had the training, I worked at the proving grounds for General Motors for years and years, and got to take vehicles out on the track, a fair amount of high performance vehicles, and feel, what they're doing, as well as reading about and learning about performance. So finally, when I got my Porsche and started tracking, then things really started developing, and taking data on the track and comparing it with my son's, he has a Pontiac Solstice, which he's faster than me, but it's fun to look that over, and then you start thinking, at least, I'm always analyzing. Whenever I see data, I analyze and, look for ways to get better. So, this is kind of a complement to that, where, as you look at actual data, which is kind of empirical or experimental, if you will, and then think about the analytical side, which is what I did in these articles.
Well, and you're doing some teaching now too, right?
Yes. I teach at Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. Used to be General Motors Institute. And there I teach thermodynamics, which is something I took 4 courses in my undergrad, way back when, and now I'm doing that I didn't do for, a long time.
So thinking as an engineer is one thing, thinking as a driver is another thing, and then thinking as a teacher and how to communicate that information is another thing again, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's why I like doing the articles, because I like explaining things. Well, that's why I wrote my book too. Well,
and I was going to say, one of the words you used when you said you were growing up, you were a gearhead, and you wrote a book, Physics for Gearheads, which is just when you first get it, you go, oh my God, it's big and thick, but you read it and you go, it's not thick, if you know what I mean. Like you've taken, I guess that's the whole idea, right? Taken the science and the physics and turned it into real people language.
Yeah. And it's not, the funny thing is, it's not any thicker than it needed to be. I did everything I could to shorten it. And I look through it and there's not many wasted words.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually, I've got it on my bookshelf, and I got to tell you that there are times when I have gone to it to go, well, what exactly is polar moment of inertia? Like here, I'm going to go and throw that term around when I'm talking about driving and, how a car handles or something like that. And I better go check this. And, so it's been a great resource for me. So I love it. But I want to go back to you talking about driving, and, can an engineer, like, can an automotive engineer be, I'm just kind of curious about this. Can an automotive engineer be a great automotive engineer if he or she doesn't drive?
I would say yes, because there's so many different types of automotive engineers.
Well, okay, I guess on the vehicle dynamics side, at least.
Yeah, I think you could probably be, but it certainly makes you a lot stronger one if you can relate the data to what's going on in the car and what you're feeling. And I think that's a major part of it. Making the data real rather than just numbers.
Okay, so let's turn that around. Will a driver be better, in your opinion, will a driver be better if they understand the physics, the engineering behind what's going on?
I think it varies. I think, everybody thinks differently. For me, definitely, because I definitely did some things wrong before I understood physics, and like load transfer. Amazingly, way back when, it wasn't obvious to me how much difference there was in traction on one side versus the other, and that it was the most important thing to keep the outside tires, on the pavement and not to worry too much about the inside ones.
Yeah,
and that once you know things like that, it can, help you take the right steps to do something about that. And also, let's say, the taking a wider arc through a curve, that's just all centripetal acceleration, and which is, velocity squared divided by radius. And if you know that your car has only a certain capability in lateral acceleration, the way to increase speed is to reduce or increase the radius, reduce the curvature. So it all makes sense.
But I guess the question then becomes, how many do we know that at the gut level? And does everybody know that at the gut level, or does it take some, understanding of the physics before we understand that the gut level? I think that's why I'm trying to kind of go, like, some of that just seems like, well, duh. Yeah. But which came first, the understanding or the experience? And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Well, to me, the experience has typically come first. Because when I took physics in high school, I remember how many questions it answered for me. It was, I knew how a car ran basically, and I knew, that a lighter car in drag racing would accelerate faster than a heavier one, and all these things. But until you see Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration, or things like that, and you can calculate numbers that go along with it. It's hard to you get into weasel words, let's say,
right? Right.
And if you read not too long on the internet, you can find plenty of weasel words on how to corner and on how to do almost everything.
Right. Yeah, on the internet, there's a definition or an explanation of how to do everything for sure. A lot of things we don't want to know.
Maybe yes, and maybe 10% are right.
Yeah,
or say things in a clear manner, and that's what I have tried to change or do differently, because I really hate to lead people wrong or not give them good information when I'm talking.
Well, and I think, there's a lot of people listening going, yep, that was the problem that I had in school, was I didn't have the meaning behind it. Like, if you had not driven a car and you're in high school and somebody starts talking about the arc through a corner and mass versus acceleration and all that kind of stuff, and you're going, what does this mean to me? Like, it means nothing to me.
Right.
But the second that you can relate it to, I'm a gearhead and I want my car to go faster, then it means something. And I think,
Yep.
I guess that's what great teachers do, right? They give what they're teaching meaning.
Yeah. And if you're lucky enough, you have all these questions before you take the subject, and then you have a reason, to go. I mean, the nice thing about cars for me was that almost every bit of physics exists somewhere in a car. So almost everything I learned in physics, whether it was electromagnetics or heat transfer or fluid dynamics or, just basic dynamics, it's all in there. So I had a reason to learn each thing. And that really helped me in school.
Which is one of the things that's cool about your book. Is, I mean, you basically just used the car and to explain physics. And for anybody that's got any kind of interest in cars and driving, it's a really cool tool to be able to go, okay, why does that work the way it does? And I've been on this kick, and this is my big word for the year, is understanding the why behind things. And I just think it's a great resource and a great tool to get a deeper understanding of why things work the way they do.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and that's, like I say, that's been my mantra, I guess, my whole life, is to relate any theory to reality, and because otherwise people don't believe it anyway, right?
Yeah. So the current little project you've got on the go of, and I know it's kind of a work in progress of this, trying to understand the line that's going to result in ultimately the best lap time. It started with some of the stuff that you did in the book, your Physics for Gearhead book, right? But you've been taking that and you've been playing with it and experimenting with it more. What are some of the big takeaways? So somebody listening to the show can go, oh, okay, that helps me think about the way I'm driving. What are some takeaways that somebody listening to this can get from what you've been doing?
Well, I think one of the things that, there's a couple questions that I have is one, going in. First off, why is the widest arc not, the fastest overall on the track, which I say constant radius arc, classic racing line. And I realize that, you can accelerate or you can brake later and into the curve and accelerate out sooner, but how much difference does it make? And the other thing that I was really curious was about the late apex and what would cause that. And I guess the interesting thing about the late apex, or the location of the apex, that you can kind of envision that one by thinking about symmetry of the curve. If you had, for example, a 500-foot straight, and you could enter that straight at, let's say, 60 miles an hour, and you go through a 90-degree curve that's constant radius, and let's say it's a 100-foot radius, and then you go through another 500-foot straight, straight number 2, and then you, at the end of that straight, have to be at 60 miles an hour. So if you think about it geometrically, it's symmetric about the center of the curve, right? You have 500 feet and then a half of a curve ahead of that, and then the second half of the curve, and then 500 feet after that. Entry into that is the same as the exit, overall of those, the straight curve and the second straight. So you have symmetry about the center. If the apex were in the center of that curve, you could split it there and have the same sort of track before and after. And then if you have a car that had the same acceleration forward as rearward, So if you think about your friction ellipse, let's say you could accelerate at 1.1 Gs and brake at 1.1 and then corner at 1 G either direction, then you would have a symmetric performing car. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why would the apex be anywhere except the center? Because, if you drove the car, in through the first straight, through the curve, and out through the second straight, whatever path you took that way that was fastest would be the same path as if you went the other way, and backwards or forwards doesn't matter for that car because its performance characteristics are symmetric fore aft. And of course, you can't do that, but as far as the performance characteristics, you could. So that told me that symmetry was important, and that how much different the braking capability is versus the forward acceleration would throw off the symmetry and, vary where that apex would be. So after we talked before, I did do some simulations on that, just using the Euler trail braking and Euler tracking out. And when I got to the point where the braking deceleration was equal to the forward acceleration capability, the apex did end up, right in the center of the curve. So, it's one of those things, the answer has to be that way. Mm-hmm. Because, I'm using an Euler line in, an Euler line out, symmetric performance. There's no reason for anything to be asymmetric. So it did do that. And then when I started reducing the forward acceleration capability, the apex started moving later, and at around a quarter G capability forward, it was around 5 degrees late. And then lower than that, it started dropping again, which I think is the conventional wisdom, that if you have a car that can't accelerate very well, you want to try to keep almost a constant speed and apex somewhere near the center. So, and I can't say that all the trends would be exactly the same as what you see on the track, because you probably don't actually take an Euler line on the way in, the Euler spiral, maybe not on the way out. It depends on how happy your car is about trail braking and all that. So, and I guess that's the other thing, is that I'm assuming that you can just go anywhere you want to on the performance envelope. And, trail braking a Porsche 911 is a lot different than trail braking a Corvette or, an older 911. So.
Right. So there's the line, and then there's the, I'll just call it the dynamics of the car, right? The balance of the car and everything that you've got to factor into that. So,
yeah.
So some of my takeaways from your takeaways, first of all, a couple of definitions in there. You use the term Euler, and for people listening to this who haven't read your articles, they might be going, is that Euler? Like I'm spilling oil? Explain that it's a type of spiral.
Yeah, it's spelled EULER. It's for I think he was a German mathematician in 300 years ago or so, who analyzed a certain type of spiral that solved a certain type of problem that he was working on, and it has the characteristic that it starts off straight and then gradually increases its curvature linearly with how far along the curve you go. So it makes a nice transition from going in a straight line to a tighter curve, and you can use that to transition into a constant radius curve, and that's what civil engineers do on highways and railroad tracks.
And so from a driving perspective, what that's kind of telling us is, and as you pointed out to me before, is that, the Euler curve may not be the ultimate perfect one, but it's, as you said, it's pretty darn close. But the real takeaway there is if you come up to a corner and just snap the steering wheel in to immediately go to this arc that you're going to carve through the corner, well, we know that that's not a good way to load the tires as well, right?
Right.
But it's also not probably the quickest line through the corner as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the nicest coincidence in all this is that, to that extent, the smooth way of transitioning and allowing the transition, the load transfer from, whether it be inside to outside or front to rear, rear to front in braking, you're allowing it to happen in a reasonable way that the car can actually do without, oscillating. I don't know what you want to call it, but going unstable, becoming, unmanageable. But also it's faster. So that's the nice.
Yeah, well, we like that.
Yeah. So, you don't have to do things, based on this that are, I don't want to say dangerous, but, risky and difficult in order to take a fast line. So that's nice.
Yeah. And I mean, the way I've always explained the way we want to load the tires is I said, if you take a piece of string and, you're holding it between your both hands and you pull the string apart and you gradually, slowly pull it apart, it takes a lot of force to snap that string. But if you take the string and you snap it very quickly, if you can see my hands moving there really quickly, it's easier to snap the string. And it's kind of the same thing with the tires. If we load them more slowly, they hold on longer. If we snap into the corner, it's easier to snap the grip level of the tires. Now, obviously, we could turn the steering wheel so slowly that we're now stuffed into the tire wall on the outside of the corner. So at some point we do have to turn the wheel, but the more gently we load those tires, the better. And I think that, so coming back to the line theory here is the way we kind of spiral into the corner, the way we use this Euler curve or spiral going into the corner, it's actually loading the tires better as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it becomes, in my book, I describe a quasi-statics and statics. Quasi-statics is when things are changing slowly enough that you can consider them steady. And if you jerk a wheel quickly, it's a dynamic change. The car will oscillate. The car might roll back and forth and definitely yaw back and forth some. But if you do it slowly, it's almost a static, steady kind of event. And it just becomes, your tire forces are more uniform and steady. They don't oscillate as much, and your traction's better overall. So,
and another takeaway, then you touched on this here, is the, kind of the general guideline. And I hate rules because rules can always be broken. And I think sometimes the rules are just, we haven't fully understood them, right? But, a guideline would be, if your car's got a ton of horsepower, a lot of torque to accelerate off the corner, not as much cornering power, you'd probably want a later apex than you would if you've got the classic spec Miata that's got cornering power maybe more than it's got acceleration power. And that would have more of the apex more towards the middle of the corner. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. It seems like it peaks, like I say, around, a quarter G or so, where you really want to get a late apex. And then according to my calculations, using, which is not necessarily representative of every car on every track and all that. But,
right.
But it seems like, there's a lot of vehicles that have decent performance that I think in second, third gear are going to accelerate around quarter G. So I think that's why we see that tendency toward a late apex being prevalent. And also, if you go out to 0.4 Gs, then it's still around 3.5 to 4 degrees, according to this, on a 90-degree curve. And, 0.4 Gs is nothing to sneeze at in a performance car. In, say, third gear, like you're going around a track.
Yeah.
So it may not sound impressive compared to, cornering at 1 G or so, but, you don't have as much traction going forward and not always the power to provide the traction.
So, yeah. So one of the other takeaways that I took from your articles and what you've done so far is the late apex is may not be as late as some people think it is, and I think that certainly agrees with my experiences. I see some people teaching such a super late apex that. And they say that it's safer, that they're teaching it because it's safer. I'm not sure turning the steering wheel more than necessary is a safer way. That's a whole other discussion. But I think, one of the things that you pointed out is that sure, it's a late apex and relative to the middle of the corner, but it's not super, super, super late.
Yeah. And, like I say, it's not the definite, end all answer, but I do think I've learned enough to say that the gradually increasing curvature or tightness when you come in, like trail braking, and then the gradually loosening of the curve on tracking out is more important than where the apex is. Because I've, in the simulations I've done, a wide variety of apex positions, and then what's the minimum radius that it reaches, and it just seems like the effect of where that apex is not nearly as strong as the Euler spiral transition. That's a huge thing comparatively.
So what I just heard there, first of all, the Euler curve transition into the corner, it's the same thing on the exit, right? It's an expanding kind of a thing as well. But what I just heard was essentially the corner entry and the corner exit is more important than where the apex is.
That's what I'm seeing. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. And as I think it through it more, it does make sense, especially, if you think about exit, it's kind of like in a drag race, like the first 60 feet, that's what drag racers look at. They look at their 60-foot times. Mm-hmm. And if you have a really fast 60-foot time, you're well on your way to, winning the race or, having a good race. If you can't cover that first 60 feet quickly, you're not accelerating fast enough. But you get ahead of the time curve, I guess you could say, by getting a quick start. And I think that's the whole thing, is that by having a little bit of a tighter arc on the curve and then being able to accelerate with part of your traction coming out instead of just holding on to that, constant radius curve, you can get ahead of that, the time curve, if you will, and, just be going a lot faster going down this next straight.
So when somebody says to you, Randy, slow in, fast out, what's based on what you've been working on here? What is your thought there?
Well, I don't know. I guess I don't see that, because what I've noticed on this is that the Euler spiral on the trail braking allows you to brake later too. Mm-hmm. Now your minimum speed is less when you do that. So if you want to call that slow in, that's fine. but really you're coming in faster, later, and you're just slowing down further into the curve rather than trying to get down to that constant speed on the track early, and then carrying that all the way around.
So it's not just what the minimum speed is, it's where the minimum speed is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe the minimum speed is a little deeper into the corner, which you could make the argument that, well, if it's later in the corner, does that mean I'm going to get back to throttle later? And
well, yeah, it depends on how quickly you unwind, I think. And it depends on, your relative acceleration capability versus cornering. Now, the next thing I'm doing is I'm going to employ a different kind of spiral called a log spiral for the tracking out. And that allows you to stay at a certain fixed set of acceleration forward and lateral. So let's say that, you're able to, you can only accelerate at 0.4 Gs, but you can accelerate forward at 0.4 while you're cornering at, say, 0.8. So that's a pretty good spot to be, because you can accelerate ahead and still be cornering, and start doing that while you're in the curve rather than waiting. And so that's the next thing I'm doing. But the funny thing there is that I thought that would, be more important on really powerful cars that accelerate well. But those cars can't really stay on that log spiral very long, because, let's say you accelerate forward at 0.6 Gs, you can probably only corner at about 0.6 then, or something like that. And so you have to unwind the wheel in, say, an Euler spiral quite a ways before you can get into that, what I call the sweet spot, where you're at, like you're already at your maximum forward acceleration, but still pretty close, but still cornering as hard as you can at that forward acceleration. But if you can only accelerate at 0.2 or whatever, like a Miata, say, you can stay on that sweet spot a long time and still be cornering at 0.9, something like that, because you haven't used up all your traction on acceleration forward.
Well, and the thing that, I don't know, I guess is what you're saying, or what you've learned through this process, I guess, does it factor in the way we're balancing the car? Like if I come into the corner and I use the trail braking to rotate the car, and that changes the attitude of the car, where I'm kind of on this line, but, I always say that there's the apex point, but there's also the apex angle. Mm-hmm. And, the angle the car is at when it's clipping past the apex is maybe more important than the point where it is actually in the corner. So if I rotate the car, get the car to change direction, even if my minimum speed is a little bit later in the corner, that isn't going to stop me from picking up the throttle early, because now the car is pointing in the right direction and I can actually commit to the throttle. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that brings up a good point, in that doing what I'm doing with just looking at the performance envelope and looking at how to apply it best on the track might tell you what kind of things you would want to improve about the car, the way the car acts, so you can utilize that. Now, my son's Solstice, it's got a nice suspension package on it and everything. And when I took that out at Gingerman, I was amazed at how happy it was trail braking. And I haven't seen that as much on some other cars that I've driven. So just because I can simulate this and draw out this nice trail braking curve or whatever, doesn't mean your car is going to be pleased, in doing that. So it may be that if you see some, missed opportunities in the way your car can perform its dynamics, then maybe it's worth, trying to retune something.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I guess the biggest thing for me is that it's making me think about what to look at and what things might be important as far as changing. Just building my own intuition,
right,
by going through it.
Well, what I most like about what you've been doing in the articles is, I guess it kind of confirms what we've learned mostly through feel and experience, what we sense, right? And I mean, if you'd come back and said, hey, everything that you're currently doing is wrong according to the math and the physics, I'd go, I don't know. But what it's doing is it's confirming what we know, and that is, as gentle and arc into the corner as we can, trail braking when we need to get the car to change direction, maybe not so much in a big, long, fast corner, but some trail braking, that minimum speed being a little bit later rather than right at the very beginning of the corner. So, yeah, I think you really kind of nailed it. I think when I asked about the slow in, fast out, you go, it's sometimes the slow in, fast out can be, the slow in is, well, my slowest point is right at the turn-in point. Well, that's probably too early because you really can't start to accelerate that early anyways. So, and then the unwinding of the wheel, we know how critically important that is through experience, but the physics is backing all that up. And then it's the thinking through, as you said, the thinking through of it, just gives us, again, a deeper understanding of why we do what we do.
Yeah, I think that's key for me, is the why. And I noted your article the other day, stressed that yesterday, I guess, was stressing that. And I'm just looking for things that I didn't know to look for.
Yeah.
Before. So,
well, and if you're listening to this and you want to get more, I mean, I highly, and I'm not, this is, just, I don't want Randy to get a big head here, but really, you should go and get Physics for Gearheads. It's a fantastic book, and just, you might not read every little bit and piece of it because some of it may not apply, but as a driver, there's some stuff in there you go, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand. And I think a lot of people that I've talked through the years, a lot of drivers, kind of said, I mean, even like but they'll read my book or one of my books and go, first time I read it, it didn't really make any sense. But then I went on the track and there were moments where I'm like, oh, and then when I went back and read it again, it sunk in even deeper. And I think that's one of the great things about Physics for Gearheads is it kind of helps us get that, aha, oh, I get it now part. So
yeah,
I highly recommend that you get it. So
the back and forth is important,
It's how we learn, right?
Yeah. Experience to theory, to experience to theory, it's just mutually strengthening.
Yeah. So, Randy, I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you for your speed secret. One piece of advice that you would give drivers, just encapsulate something and go, that's my one piece of advice for drivers. What would it be?
Well, to me, power is not the end all. I think that's one thing here. Traction and knowing how to utilize it is a lot more important than power. And I think, that's important in drag racing. It's important in road racing. And, cars keep going higher and higher to like 700 horsepower, 800 horsepower. I'm happy with 300, and I think I can do almost anything I want to on the track with that. So, yeah.
Great advice. So it's what you do with the power that's more important, and being able to manage the traction.
Yeah, and I'm not good enough to utilize every bit of 300 horsepower yet. So,
And the best word there was yet.
yeah, exactly. Someday, yeah, hopefully.
Well, and again, going back to the thing that I like about what you're doing is, and what you've written about is, yes, it's coming from a science perspective, the physics, the engineering side of it, but you drive and you get it, and you know what questions to ask because of your experience, whether it's being a gearhead teen in Kansas, or in your Porsche at Gingerman or Groton or someplace. So that's the cool part. So
just love cars.
Yeah, what a great disease, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Randy, where obviously people can buy your book, where Amazon is that where?
Yeah, Amazon. There's Barnes and Noble. There's a few other smaller outlets that carry it. A couple of automotive, motorsports stores.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, there are some schools that are using it, right? Is that right?
A couple of them. More have talked about it than actually are so far.
Okay.
But, it's one of those things that a lot of people have suggested would be a really good thing to do, especially, I could see it being used in a high school for a certain audience, like me.
Mm.
And I think it would bring a lot to a lot of people to bring things to a firmer foundation as far as how things really work. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, so if anybody's listening and you're in the school, the education system, think about how much more kids would learn if they could actually understand and apply the physics to something they either do or want to do, or probably want to do real soon, which is drive a car.
Yeah. Otherwise it's too abstract.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Randy, thanks for being on the show, and thanks for continuing to write really thought-provoking, thought-generating articles for my Speed Secrets Weekly. That's, like I said, I'm almost now a little afraid when we publish one of your articles, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have all these emails tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it continues.
Yeah.
I want to thank you too for not only having me, but for verifying that a lot of the stuff I'm thinking is on the right track, so to speak. Because you were saying it's good to see that this verifies what you're thinking, but of course you have a lot of track experience, and as well as others. And I would hate to have theory fly in the face of known practice. So it's worked out.
I'm waiting for the next round and the next round of it, because I'm actually hoping we'll get to a point where you're going to come up with something and I go, really? I don't know if that makes sense, because that's when it really makes us dig deeper, right?
Yeah.
Because then we got to go, well, why does that not seem right? And then we learn even more.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've run into that in industry too. So
yeah.
Well,
okay. Thanks for being on the show, Randy. We'll wrap it up, and as always, keep having fun. And hopefully, I'm going to see you back at one of the Rally Sport Region PCA events soon.
Yeah, I hope so. Talk to you later. Thanks again.
Thanks. Speaking of cornering lines, I've published a set of track maps that you can use to study a particular circuit or make notes of what's working and not working with the way you're driving. You can access them, even download them for free at speedsecrets.com/trackmaps. Again, speedsecrets.com/trackmaps. Hey, don't miss next week's show, as I have one of the winningest sports car drivers around as a guest. Until then, keep learning and having fun.